I think Heart of Darkness is very properly given a tremendous amount of attention. It is pretty momentous. It was momentous in its time and in its critique of Belgian Congo, absolutely focused on that, and on the question of imperialism, and it hooks in British imperialism as well, coming all out of Conrad's experience as a member of the British Merchant Marine, and also having had this extraordinary job of going up the Congo River in the pay of the Belgians. It felt important at the time, and a sense of its importance has grown as our sense of the importance of getting to grips with colonial history, our European colonialism, that is a kind of obligation, if you like, to the historical business that we were so heavily involved in, as a sense of the necessity to think about and analyse all of that has grown, and Conrad's place, and the place of Heart of Darkness in particular, in that analysis has a sense of Conrad's place has grown with the growing sense of the importance of getting to kind of grips with this piece of the past, and of course, Heart of Darkness has fallen off the tree, you might say, into the hands of this, in some ways, rather belated concern by historians and politicians. And Conrad has done it so well. I mean, he's put his finger on so many of the kind of the issues, the questions, and what is more, of course, wrapped it all up in this extraordinarily engaging fiction, you know, where the whole question of coming to understand what all of these horrors actually mean and how they work is wrapped up in this extraordinary text, which is thinking in parallel with all of that how narrative works. You know, and not just how you come to grips with a momentous set of historical events, but also how any kind of fictional attempt to come to terms with the world and politics and everything with the human, how it works. So it's a kind of extraordinary kind of double whammy going on here, the historical political subject and the subject of how you write a novel, or well, it's not a novel, yes. It's a novelle. It's how you write a fiction about it.
Because of course Conrad got criticised, I think, by F.R. Leavis among others for being too wordy, and yet actually it's Marlowe who's too wordy, isn't it? I mean, Marlowe is a character created by Conrad. That whole idea of the unreliable narrator.
Yeah. I mean, Leavis is completely wrong about Heart of Darkness in its. In many ways. I mean, he approves of its kind of moral thrust, but keeps attacking it for verbal fuzziness. You know, particularly attacks. Marlowe keeps has this extraordinary rhetoric, doesn't he, about the incredible, the impossible, all these.
But this is Marlowe talking.
Yeah, this is Marlowe.
This is not Conrad talking, it's Marlowe talking.
Exactly. The indescribable, the incredible, etc., etc. A whole list of these were adjectives of negative capability, as it were. And Leavis said, essentially, you know, Conrad should pull his finger out and, you know, and stop messing about and stop sort of saying, say it rather than saying how unsayable it is. But this misses entirely the point. it seems to me, that what we're being presented with is a set of events which disable narrative. They put the narrator, the observer, the Marlowe figure, in a quandary. How on earth do you put these terrible things into words?
How do you describe this?
Yeah, language fails. We're presented with, as it were, not just a kind of an attack on the imagination. How can one cope with thinking about, imagining, conceiving all of these horrors? Naturally, that, you might say naturally, that is a disabling, and that disabling is registered in the disabling of narration. Of course, it's not just, as Lever suggested, that Conrad should pull his finger out, as it were, and say, well, no, we're being presented with the difficulty of language to confront the unsayable.
And that's, in a way, what Conrad was saying, that words just can't, you can't
Exactly.
do it in words.
Exactly. No, Conrad touches on, as it were, the unsayable all over the place. I mean, it's a great theme of Under Western Eyes, for example. But here he puts it in a nutshell, and that's part of the power of this. It's very succinct. It's very potent. It's a little pocket battleship, you might say.
Heart of Darkness is.
The Heart of Darkness, yes.
And this idea that words, doesn't he say something like words themselves are a consoling illusion, that we console ourselves with words? And it's
And by the same token, of course, Marlowe confronts the sort of mystery, or confronts Africa and the whole experience as a kind of disabling set of mysteries, and part of that mysteriousness, the incredible nature of it, the difficulty of registering it is, of course, registered in the linguistic aspects out there. Babble, he keeps saying babble. It's a babble, the babble of many voices. Now, what is interesting, of course, in all of that is that a lot of kind of post-colonialist critics have seized on that and said, Conrad's a racist because all he hears is kind of the black other as talking nonsense. That misses the point, it seems to me, of what Conrad is addressing. One of the terrible things about modern reading of Heart of Darkness is that lecture by Chinua Achebe.
Yes, he obviously thinks that Conrad doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
But
Chinua Achebe,
so far from being brave, as everyone thought until then, he says he
Achebe gives this lecture at the University of Massachusetts, in which he seizes on all of that kind of thing, and says that this denotes Conrad as a racist. This seems to be quite extraordinary. This is a play about, this is a nouvelle about racism. It is about the racism of the Belgians, and by implication, of course, the racism of all imperialism.
No one else was coming anywhere near making this kind of point, were they, then? I mean, when Conrad wrote this, my point is that he was being very brave at the time.
Well,
looking at it from now, he can be criticised, perhaps, but
I mean, racism was normal
that's what
in the period, and even people who writers and so on who were you would think of as kind of terrifically liberal will are racists, no doubt about that. You know, Tennyson can quite cheerfully talk about the Kaffirs out there in Africa, and how they're having the nerve to defeat the British army and so on. All of that kind of thing. There's a kind of deploring, a downgrading of the dark other world. Okay, all of that. You know, we are a colonialist. The West, French, British, Belgian, doesn't matter, is utterly kind of colonialist and racist, and so on. And Conrad stands out. He stands out, and I think he stands out because he'd experienced racism himself. You know, as a Pole, as a person who was jeered at for being Polish Joe. They called him on British ships because his English wasn't any good and so on. Who was in Polish ways himself quite racist. Actually, he hated Russians. Hated Russians. I have nothing to do with Russians. And you know, in Heart of Darkness, there is a lot about Poland's traditional enemies, you might say, in the person of Kurz, who has a German name and has a Russian sidekick and so on. Germans and Russians, they stand for the traditional enemies of Poland. There's kind of very conscious of that, of squeezing Poland from both sides.
So his villain is compounded of
yeah,
two.
but there's no black racism. There's no racism about Africans. On the contrary, this is a story full of extreme compassion for what's going on with black people, slaves. It's a kind of extraordinary scene, isn't it? In which Marlowe sees a black man who's dead by the side of the path with a bullet hole through his head and so on. You know, that kind of thing. The behaviour of the colonialists is sort of outrageous, and we're implicated. What's interesting is the way in which that Russian sidekick of Kurtz and so on has this. He dressed like a map, isn't he? Like the map that Marlowe looks at with the different colours of the colonial settlements in Africa and so on. There's the red bit of the map. Good work, just some good work done in there, thinks Marlowe. The red bit of the map, okay, as opposed to the Belgian bit. But later on he meets the Russian who patched himself. He's patched like a map of Africa, and at a certain point he goes off armed with bullets. He goes off armed. This colonialist goes off dressed in Marlowe's shoes and with some of Marlowe's bullets, and he puts them in the red pocket. And you know, there's a wonderful scene, isn't there, where they discover a book, a seamanship, a guide, Towser's guide, an actual guide, by the way, does exist, it's a book of seamanship, this wonderful thing sewn together with white cotton and so on. This mystery, this book, this English book of seamanship, full of a right way of going about things and so on. All of that is absolute the essence of the English merchant marine. Okay, all of that. And then it turns out it belongs to the Russian. Kurtz's friend and so on. You know, he's the person who absorbed all this kind of British stuff. No. Conrad, the victim of racism, and in terms of European things, pretty Polish racist, but not in relation to Africa. Yeah, Achebe is quite wrong. And what's interesting is that it's just silly, actually, it's just silly. A misreading of this novel, which has had tremendous effect. Critics jumping up and down, jumping on the bandwagon, agreeing with Achebe. I'm gobsmacked.